If you saw something on a screen that couldn't exist, would you trust your eyes or the data telling you it was real? What if that screen was buried in a forgotten basement, tracking movements across a desert that was supposed to be empty? What if the system monitoring those movements was officially decommissioned 40 years ago? This isn't a theory. This is what I found while working as a sheriff's deputy in Esmeralda County, Nevada, a live radar feed that shouldn't have been operational. A single contact moving with purpose across the most remote terrain in America. And when that contact vanished, people started disappearing too. What follows is my account of what happens when curiosity meets something that doesn't want to be found. When a local investigation collides with interests that have the power to make problems, and people vanish without a trace. This is a story of the Desert Shield Network, and why some secrets stay buried only until someone digs in the wrong place. The storage room was in the sublevel of our county building, a structure dating back to 1967, when federal money flowed into Nevada for projects nobody discussed. Originally a Cold War fallout shelter, by the time I joined the department, it was just a dumping ground for paperwork nobody needed and equipment nobody remembered. I was down there on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, hunting for a property dispute file from 1987. The air smelled of damp concrete and decaying paper. Filing cabinets stood like mismatched tombstones in the weak fluorescent light. After 20 minutes of searching, I noticed a soft green glow coming from behind the tallest cabinet. I squeezed through the gap and found it. A bulky CRT monitor, the kind with the deep back and glass that looked like it could stop a bullet. It was powered on. The screen displayed a black background overlaid with precise white grid. Topographic markers lined the edges. At the center, a single white dot pulsed rhythmically, moving from northwest to southeast. Beside it, a stream of numbers scrolled in a continuous loop. Latitude, longitude, altitude, heading, speed. Everything about it screamed military precision. The speed read 40 miles per hour. Altitude 300 feet. The coordinates placed it somewhere in the mountains east of Goldfield. This shouldn't have been here. I'd worked for the Esmeralda County Sheriff's Office for 6 years. I knew every piece of equipment we owned, and this wasn't ours. Policing 3,500 square miles of high desert taught you what mattered and what was bureaucratic theater. Most of the job was long, empty drives and mediating arguments between ranchers who lived 20 miles apart. The former sheriff used to say our work was 98% loneliness and 2% pure terror. You never knew when the 2% would arrive. I watched the dot for several minutes. Its movement was unnervingly consistent. Straight line trajectory. Constant speed. It looked less like an aircraft and more like something following a predetermined path that MY curiosity has got me into trouble before. It's a trait I've never been able to suppress. Instead of leaving, I started examining the equipment around the monitor. Dust-covered panels with faded abbreviations. Cables snaking into junction boxes mounted on the concrete walls. Something that resembled an antique telephone switchboard buried under a gray blanket of neglect. The desk drawer was mostly empty, old coffee cups, petrified sandwiches wrapped in wax paper that might have been from the Reagan administration. But in the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of electrical schematics printed on that thin, blue-tinted paper from copy machines of another era, I found a thick 3-ring binder. The cover read, Desert Shield Radar Network. Operational Protocols. Authorized personnel only. The binder was heavy, maybe 300 pages. Flipping through it, I found technical specifications written in that dense jargon that makes everything sound vitally important and completely incomprehensible. But the basics were clear enough. During the early 1970s, amid peak Cold War paranoia, the federal government installed a network of 23 radar stations across rural Nevada. Their purpose: detect potential Soviet airspace violations. The stations fed data to centralized monitoring hubs like the room I was standing in. The system was designed to track aircraft, missiles, any aerial object moving through designated corridors. I turned to the back section, labeled Decommissioning Procedures. According to the documents, the entire Desert Shield network was ordered shut down in 1983. The protocols included step-by-step instructions for powering down equipment, removing classified components, and destroying remaining hardware. A checklist was supposed to be completed and sent to a federal office in Washington. The checklist in my hands was blank. The system was never shut down. Someone had either neglected to complete the procedure or deliberately kept it running. I looked back at the monitor. The white dot continued its steady progression. As I watched, it stopped moving. The coordinates froze. The readout still showed altitude 300 feet, but speed dropped to 0. It remained motionless for 30 seconds. Then it vanished. Not a fade, not a drift off the edge of the grid. One moment it was there. The next it was gone, as if whatever had been generating the signal had simply ceased to exist. I closed the binder, returned to the drawer, and went upstairs to finish my paperwork. I told myself it was a glitch, an aging system interpreting electromagnetic noise as a solid contact, ghost in the machine. But that night, lying in bed in my Goldfield apartment, a town of maybe 300 people, 2 bars, and enough abandoned buildings to feel perpetually haunted, I couldn't stop thinking about that. Its perfect consistency. Its sudden disappearance. The next day was Thursday, my eastern patrol route. A 6-hour loop through mining ghost towns and isolated homesteads. As I drove out of town in our department's battered Ford Explorer, I passed the turnoff for one of the radar installations mentioned in the binder. I'd driven past it 100 times without a second thought. Just another decaying piece of Cold War infrastructure. This time, I turned off the paved highway onto the dirt road. The road wound 3 miles into the foothills before dead-ending at a chain-link fence. A faded sign warned no trades passing. U.S. government property. The lock had corroded to nothing. Someone had pushed the gate open wide enough to drive through. The installation consisted of a concrete bunker built into the hillside and a radar tower rising about 60 feet above it, topped with a large dish antenna. Everything was weathered, paint peeled in long curls. Windows were broken or missing entirely. The place had the profound loneliness of something that had outlived its purpose. I parked and got out. The wind up here was constant, whistling to the tower's structural supports, making the whole structure creak and groan. I walked toward the bunker entrance. Most equipment had been stripped. Empty racks, cut cables dangling. But the dish antenna on the tower was still rotating. Slowly, lazily, but moving. And when I stood on the concrete pad at the tower's base, I felt a faint vibration through my boots. A low electrical hum seemed to emanate from beneath the concrete. This place was supposed to be inside the bunker. Decommissioned. The sound of an engine approaching up the dirt road stopped me. A plume of dust was visible in the distance, moving fast. I returned to my Explorer and waited. A dark blue Chevrolet Suburban with government plates pulled up. 2 men got out. Civilian clothes, jeans, work shirts, sunglasses. But they carried themselves with the rigid posture of military or federal agents. The driver was older, maybe late 50s, with short gray hair and a sun-weathered face. The passenger was younger, muscular, with an expression that suggested he wasn't happy to see me. The older man approached my window. "Morning," he said, his voice neutral. "You're a long way from the main road. Having trouble?" "Just checking the area," I said. "Part of my regular patrol. We get trespassers sometimes." "This is federal property," he said, his eyes studying me. "County jurisdiction doesn't extend here. I'm aware, but we still get calls. And since federal agencies aren't patrolling out here regularly, we keep an eye on things." The younger man had positioned himself behind my vehicle, his hand resting casually near his belt where I could see the outline of a concealed weapon. "Appreciate the concern," the older man said, "but we've got this site covered. No need for county involvement." He paused. "What brings you up here specifically? You said this is your regular route. But I don't see much reason for law enforcement to be at an abandoned radar station unless you're looking for something particular." I considered lying, but something in his demeanor suggested he'd know. "I found some old monitoring equipment in our office basement," I said. "Looks like it's connected to sites like this one. Still seems to be operational, which seemed odd since everything I've read says these were shut down decades ago. Thought I'd take a look." His expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. He exchanged a glance with his partner. "That equipment should have been disconnected years ago," he said calmly. "What you're seeing is residual activity. Electromagnetic interference creating false positives. The actual radar installations have been offline since the mid-'80s. He offered a thin smile. I'd recommend leaving the equipment powered down. Old systems can be unpredictable. No point wasting time investigating phantom contacts. So the network is completely decommissioned? I asked. Nobody's maintaining these sites. That's correct, he said. This installation and others like it are officially abandoned. We check occasionally for security and environmental hazards, but that's it. He gestured around. As you can see, everything of value was removed long ago. I nodded, trying to look convinced. Understood, I said. I'll make sure the monitoring station gets disconnected. Appreciate it, he said, stepping back. Probably best if you continue your patrol elsewhere. I started the engine and turned around on the narrow road. In my rear-view mirror, I saw them standing beside the Suburban, watching until I was out of sight. They didn't enter the installation. They didn't inspect anything. They just made sure I left. The rest of my patrol passed without incident. A cattle dispute, a tourist stuck in sand, the usual rhythm of rural law enforcement. But the encounter at the radar site sat uneasily in my mind. Their arrival felt too timely. Their explanations too rehearsed. When I returned to the office late that afternoon, I went down to the storage room. Someone had been there in my absence. The monitor was still on. The equipment still hummed. But the binder with the Desert Shield protocols was gone, removed from the drawer where I'd left it. The desk surface had been wiped clean of dust. All the old trash, the coffee cups, the fossilized sandwiches, had been cleared away. The room no longer looked like forgotten storage. It looked maintained, sanitized. I sat at the desk and watched the empty grid on the monitor. The cursor pulsed slowly in the corner. I thought about the two men who had appeared so quickly at the installation, about their insistence that the network was dead, about this cleaned room. None of it added up if the system was truly abandoned. The screen flickered. A new contact appeared in the northern sector of the grid, a white dot moving south-southeast at 35 miles per hour. Altitude 250 feet. I watched it track across terrain I knew was empty desert punctuated by harsh mountain ranges. No roads out there. No settlements. Just like before, the dot stopped moving. It held position for 20 seconds. Then it vanished from the display. I powered down the monitor. I turned off the lights. But as I drove home to the gathering desert twilight, the stars emerging with shocking brilliance in the pollution-free sky, I knew I couldn't let this go. When someone tells you not to look, that's usually where you need to look the hardest. 3 days later, on Saturday morning, the first missing person report landed on my desk. Irene Dufresne came into the office, her face pale with a fear that was immediate and visceral. Her husband, Warren, had gone out Thursday night to investigate strange lights he'd seen moving in the hills near the old mining district. He'd taken his dark green Dodge Dakota, said he'd be back in an hour or two. He never returned. When did he leave? I asked, my stomach tightening. About 10 Thursday night, she said. Thursday night. The same evening I'd watched that second contact appear and vanish on the monitor. She described the lights Warren had seen, low to the ground, moving slow but steady, in places no vehicle could go. He thought it might be kids on ATVs or metal scavengers. I filed a report and spent the morning organizing a search. Resources in a county this size are laughably thin. No helicopters, no thermal imaging, just a few deputies and whatever local volunteers we could round up who knew the brutal terrain. We searched the mining district all afternoon. Miles of abandoned claims, unstable shafts, crumbling structures. We found recent tire tracks, beer cans, evidence of people passing through. We found no sign of Warren Dufresne or his truck. We called off the search at sunset, planning to resume Sunday. Sunday morning brought the second report. Gilbert Armbruster, a 68-year-old retiree, was missing. His daughter, who called him every Sunday from Las Vegas, hadn't been able to reach him. She drove up and found his house empty, his truck gone. Neighbors reported seeing him Friday evening loading camping gear into his vehicle, mentioning he wanted to go stargazing in a remote area with no light pollution. His preferred stargazing locations, according to his daughter, were in the eastern foothills, the same general area where the radar contacts had appeared and vanished. 2 disappearances, 36 hours apart. Both men headed into remote desert areas at night, both investigating or observing something unusual. Sheriff CR returned from Reno that afternoon. I briefed him. He listened with the patient focus that made him good at a nearly impossible job, then asked a question hanging in the air. Do you think these are related? The timing and geography are concerning, I said carefully, but no direct connection between the men that I can find yet. We treat them as separate for now, he decided, but we look for connections. Expand the search. Coordinate with neighboring counties. Put out immediate request for information. The media request went out that evening. A brief notice in the local paper and on the 2 radio stations that reached our scattered population. I didn't expect much. In rural Nevada, people mostly keep to themselves. But by Monday morning, my phone was ringing. Most calls were dead ends, well-meaning but irrelevant. 3 stood out. The first was from Constance Gilchrist, a rancher who lived 12 miles east of the mining district. She reported seeing unusual lights in the sky late Thursday night. They weren't normal, she said, her voice crackling over the poor connection. Sharp turns at high speed, vertical climbs, completely silent, even though they were close enough I should have heard engines. My dogs barked for an hour straight. The second call was from Horace Trask, a grizzled prospector who still worked a small claim in the mountains. He reported finding strange marks on the ground Friday morning. 3 depressions about 3 feet in diameter, arranged in a perfect triangle. The sand and rock inside each depression had a fused, glassy texture, as if subjected to intense heat. He'd taken photos. The third call was an anonymous voicemail left on the office machine after hours. A digitally distorted voice said, "Stop looking into the disappearances. Stop accessing equipment you don't understand. This is your only warning." I saved the recording and played it for Sheriff CR. "That's a credible threat," he said quietly, "which means you stumbled into something someone with resources wants hidden." He leaned back in his chair. "The question is whether we proceed or back off and let federal authorities handle it. Do we have confirmation federal authorities are actually investigating?" I asked, "Or are they the ones who wants to stop?" CR didn't have an answer. We sat in silence for a long minute. "Follow up on the tips," he finally said. "Talk to the rancher. See what the prospector found. But be careful. If someone's threatening you over missing person cases, they're already willing to commit crimes to protect their operation." That afternoon, I drove out to Constance Gilchrist's ranch. Her property was windswept and harsh, livestock looking more resilient than thriving. She was a woman in her 60s with the practical skepticism of someone who'd spent a lifetime dealing with the desert's realities. She walked me through what she'd seen, pointing toward the mountains as she described the light's impossible maneuvers. "I've seen military craft from Nellis," she said. "Drones, satellites, helicopters. These weren't any of those. They moved like they were intelligently controlled, but the maneuvers would have killed any pilot, and the silence was wrong. Did you report it?" I asked. "Who to?" she said, shrugging. "The same people who'd tell me it was swamp gas or Venus. Sometimes you see things, and the smart move is to keep it to yourself unless someone asks." From there, I drove toward Horace Trask's claim. Following roads had deteriorated into rocky trails that tested the explorer's 4-wheel drive. Trask met me where the vehicle could go no further, a man in his 70s who looked carved from the landscape itself. We hiked a mile into rocky hillsides before he showed me the marks. They were exactly as he described. 3 depressions, too regular to be natural erosion, arranged in a triangle with about 40 feet between points. Inside each, the ground was smooth and glassy like obsidian. I took photographs from multiple angles, measured the distances, and collected a small sample of the fused material. "Ever seen anything like this?" Trask asked. "Never," I admitted. "You're sure they weren't here Wednesday?" "Positive. I work this area every few days. They appeared between Wednesday and Friday morning. As I worked, my mind connected dots I didn't want to connect. Thursday night lights. Friday morning ground marks. Thursday and Friday disappearances. The radar contacts blinking out. Tuesday morning brought the news I'd been dreading. A hiker found Warren Dufresne's truck, abandoned in a ravine about 20 miles from where he'd gone to investigate lights. The vehicle was locked, keys missing, no signs of struggle, no blood, nothing out of place except the driver's absence. It was as if Warren had parked, locked up, and walked into the desert. The location was within 3 miles of the coordinates I'd recorded from the radar monitor before it failed. We organized a larger search. Volunteers from neighboring towns. We covered miles of brutal terrain. We found nothing. No tracks. No personal items. No indication Warren had ever been there beyond his truck, sitting silently in that ravine. Gilbert Armbruster's daughter hired a private search and rescue team from Las Vegas. Professionals with dogs, drones, and thermal cameras we could never afford. They spent 3 days scouring the eastern foothills. They found nothing. No campsite. No vehicle. No trace. By Wednesday evening, both investigations had completely stalled. 2 missing men. 1 abandoned vehicle. Reports of impossible lights. Mysterious ground marks. And no leads that pointed at anything concrete. Sheriff CR held a press conference. I fielded calls from concerned residents and media outlets asking if we had a serial killer or some environmental hazard. I had no answers that wouldn't sound insane. That night, I returned to the storage room and tried to restart the monitoring equipment. It remained dead, completely unresponsive. But as I examined the setup more carefully, I noticed something I had missed. A modern network cable, clean and new, running from the main console into a junction box, then into conduit that disappeared into the wall. The station wasn't isolated. It was networked, connected to something. I followed the cable through the basement's maze of corridors until it terminated at a locked electrical room. The lock was new, a heavy-duty deadbolt, completely different from the old hardware on every other door. Someone had recently upgraded security on that specific room. Back in the office, I checked maintenance records. I found a work order from 18 months ago. Electrical upgrades performed by a contractor from Las Vegas, paid for by a federal infrastructure grant for rural counties. Routine modernization. The contractor's name was unfamiliar. When I looked them up that evening, I found their business registration had been terminated. Their website was gone. The address listed for their headquarters was an empty lot in an industrial park north of Las Vegas. The federal grant program was real, but the specific grant number for our county wasn't in any public database I could access. It was a paper trail designed to satisfy a casual look, but disintegrate under scrutiny. A bureaucratic smokescreen. Thursday afternoon, another anonymous call. Same distorted voice. The monitoring equipment is being removed. Do not interfere. Do not discuss what you've seen. This is your final warning. I went immediately to the storage room. 2 men in unmarked gray coveralls were already there, carefully disconnecting components and packing them into sturdy, shock-resistant cases. They looked up when I entered, but didn't stop working. The older man was the same federal agent I'd encountered at the radar installation. Who authorized this? I demanded. This is county property. Without a word, he handed me a document, a federal reclamation order. It bore an official seal from an agency whose acronym I didn't recognize, signed by someone with an imposing title. The order cited national security concerns and obsolete equipment requiring proper disposal. It included language mandating local cooperation and absolute confidentiality. This is evidence in 2 missing person investigations. I said. We're aware of the disappearances, he said calmly, continuing to pack a circuit board. They're being investigated by appropriate authorities. Your role is concluded. Continue with your normal duties. And if I keep investigating. He stopped and looked at me, his expression professionally neutral. Then you'll discover that federal jurisdiction supersedes county authority in matters of national security. Your cooperation is appreciated but not required. The equipment is being removed regardless. They finished within the hour. The room was stripped bare. Only the empty desk and filing cabinets remained. All traces of the Desert Shield monitor, the cables, the junction boxes, gone. Eradicated as thoroughly as if it had never existed. Before leaving, the older man handed me a plain white business card. Nothing on it but a 10-digit phone number. If you remember anything else about the system or the data you accessed, he said, call this number. Don't discuss it with anyone else. Don't file reports. Don't investigate on your own. This is above your clearance level, and pursuing it further will only create problems for you and your department. After they left, I sat in the empty room for a long time. 2 people were missing, possibly dead, and the only tangible lead I had was just confiscated by the same people warning me to stand down. Every instinct screamed cover-up, that whatever was happening in the desert was considered important enough that disappearing civilians was an acceptable cause of secrecy. The smart move would be to back off, to follow orders, to hope some opaque federal investigation eventually provided answers. But I became a law enforcement officer because I believed in accountability, in protection. Abandoning that now meant accepting that some lives were expendable, that secrecy trumped truth. I wouldn't do that. Friday morning, I found an unmarked manila envelope slipped under my apartment door. Hand-delivered during the night. Inside, a USB drive and a handwritten note on plain paper. You want to know what happened to them? Watch this. Then decide if you really want to keep digging. My hands were steady as I plugged the drive into my laptop. It contained 4 video files, each labeled with dates from the past month, all timestamps between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. The first video showed footage from a trail camera aimed at a dirt road. Date, October 8th, 11:47 p.m. For 30 seconds, nothing, then movement at the edge of the frame. A light, hovering about 6 feet off the ground, pulsing with a soft white glow. No vehicle, no source. Just a light moving by itself as it passed the camera, the video distorted, pixels fragmenting into digital snow. The audio filled with mechanical hum, overlaid with what sounded like whispers in a language I didn't recognize. The light stopped at a bend in the road, then divided into 3 separate lights. They arranged themselves in triangular pattern, the same configuration as the ground marks Horace Trask had shown me. The 3 lights descended slowly. The moment they made contact with the ground, the camera feed whited out completely. When the image returned 5 seconds later, the lights were gone. Only the empty road remained. The second video was dated October 15th, night vision footage showing a single light moving in a search pattern over open desert. Then a pickup truck entered the frame. The light immediately changed trajectory, streaking toward the vehicle with impossible speed. It positioned itself directly above the truck. The driver's door opened. A man got out. He looked up at the light, waving his arms in clear agitation. The light pulsed brighter, a sudden, blinding flare even in the green hue of night vision. The man collapsed. The light descended until it hovered maybe 5 feet above his still form. The video distorted again. When it cleared, both the man and the light were gone. Only the truck remained, door still open, headlights still on. I recognized that truck. Dark green Dodge Dakota. Warren Dufresne. My breath caught in my chest. The third video, October 19th. An RV parked in the foothills. Gilbert Armbruster's favorite stargazing spot. Confirmed by the telescope set up outside. 3 lights appeared in formation, descending silently. Gilbert stood up from his telescope, took a step back. The lights pulsed. Gilbert's body went rigid. Then he took 3 steps forward. His movements were wrong, mechanical, puppet-like, joints moving with stiff precision. He walked directly beneath the triangle of lights and stopped. The video distorted. When it cleared, Gilbert was gone. The RV and telescope remained, untouched. The 4th video was dated October 27th, just 2 days earlier. It showed the dirt road where we'd found Warren's truck, but from a different elevated angle. And I was in the frame, searching the area with my team. Someone had been watching us, documenting our investigation from several hundred yards away. The final 30 seconds, after we left, a single light appeared. It moved along the exact path I had walked during the search, retracing my steps with unnerving accuracy. Then it turned and moved directly toward the camera's position, growing larger until it filled the entire frame. The video ended there, abruptly cut. I sat paralyzed before my screen. The footage could have been faked, but something about it felt terrifyingly authentic. The details were too specific, the locations too accurate. Someone had documented what was happening in the Nevada desert, and they just delivered the evidence to me. I made 3 copies of the videos, one on an external drive, one uploaded to a private cloud storage I rarely used, one left on a laptop. Then I took the original USB drive to Sheriff CR. He watched in his office with the door closed, his expression hardening with each video. When the screen went black after the 4th, he was silent for a full minute. "This is the 3rd time," he said finally, his voice low. "Third time what?" "Third time in 20 years someone has brought me evidence of unexplained phenomena in this county. First was 2003. A ranch hand with photos of something he couldn't identify. Second was 2011. A family camping near Tonopah with video of lights performing impossible maneuvers." He rubbed his forehead. "Both times, federal agents showed up within 48 hours, confiscated everything, made it very clear we should forget what we'd seen, threatened consequences if we didn't." "What happened to the people who brought the evidence?" "The ranch hand moved to Oregon suddenly. The family stopped returning calls. Their social media went inactive." He looked at me. "They became quiet people." Saturday morning, Sheriff CR received an official notice from the State Attorney General's office. Our missing persons investigations were being assumed by federal authorities. We were ordered to cease all activities immediately and turn over all related materials. The notice threatened legal and professional repercussions for noncompliance. That same night, my laptop caught fire. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard a sharp pop from the living room. I rushed in to find the laptop smoking, the battery swollen and cracked, a chemical stench filling the air. I unplugged it, but the damage was done. The machine was a melted, blackened ruin. I remembered the copies. The external drive was in my desk drawer. I pulled it out, plugged it into an old computer I used for taxes. The drive was corrupted, unreadable. I logged into the private cloud storage. My password was rejected. I tried the recovery options. The account, along with all its contents, had been deleted. Every copy of the videos was gone, wiped clean by someone with remote access to my systems. Monday morning, Sheriff CR looked 10 years older. He called me into his office and closed the door. "They visited me last night," he said quietly. 2 men, very polite, very professional, and absolutely clear that continued investigation would result in consequences we wouldn't enjoy. He met my eyes. "They knew about the videos, knew you'd made copies. They considered that noncompliance." "What did you tell them?" "I told them we were following the Attorney General's order, that the investigations were closed." He sighed. "They suggested early retirement might be a good option for me. They suggested you might find better career opportunities outside of law enforcement. They weren't making suggestions." "So that's it? We just walk away?" "I have a wife, grandkids in Reno." His voice was thick with shame and resignation. "You're young. You can start over somewhere else. Somewhere this, whatever this is, isn't happening." I left his office. The message was clear, delivered through multiple channels. Stop, or be stopped. But that night I drove to Constance's Gilchrist Ranch anyway. I had to know if her security cameras had caught more than she'd initially told me. She was hesitant, looking over my shoulder into the dark as we stood on her porch. "They told you to drop it," she said. "They're not my boss," I said. "What did your cameras see on October 24th? She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Come inside." On a monitor in her cluttered living room, she pulled up files. Her system had 8 cameras covering various angles of her property. She queued up footage from the night in question. For the first hour, nothing but stars and the occasional coyote. Then, at 1:17 a.m., a single light entered the frame from the north. Then another, and another, until at least a dozen lights were visible, spread across the northern horizon. They began moving in a coordinated, grid-like pattern, sweeping back and forth across a several square mile area of desert to the east of her ranch. It was a systematic search. Methodical, professional. It continued for nearly 2 hours before, as one unit, they withdrew to the north and vanished. They were looking for something, Constance whispered. Or someone, I said, making sure they didn't leave any evidence behind. I was 15 miles from town on the drive back when I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. A single vehicle, maintaining a precise distance, matching my speed exactly. It was a dark blue Suburban. The Suburban's high beams flashed twice. A signal. The older federal agent pulled alongside me and pointed emphatically toward the shoulder. I slowed and pulled over onto the gravel, the Explorer's tires crunching in the immense silence of the desert night. He approached my window. I rolled it down, the cold air rushing in. "You're not very good at following instructions," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of the false politeness from our previous encounters. "The sheriff told you to drop the investigation. Yet here you are, still gathering evidence, still asking questions. 2 people are missing. That's my jurisdiction until someone shows me a federal case number. 2 people are being handled by appropriate authorities. You don't have the resources, the training, or the clearance to investigate what happened to them." He paused, studying my face in the dashboard glow. "You want to know what they are? The lights." I said nothing. They're autonomous monitoring systems deployed by a classified program. Advanced drones. Sometimes they malfunction. When that happens, people in the wrong place at the wrong time could be affected. It's unfortunate, but it's also why civilians like you don't need to know the specifics. "That's a lie." I said, the words out before I could stop them. "Those systems took people. You know it, and you're covering it up." His expression hardened into something cold and final. "You're interfering with operations vital to national security. People who interfere don't just lose their jobs. They disappear from public record. They become complications that get resolved quietly and permanently." He started walking back to his vehicle, then turned. "The lights are active tonight. Multiple systems in a coordinated search pattern. If I were you, I'd go home, lock my doors, and stay inside until morning." He got into the Suburban. They didn't drive away immediately. They sat there, engine idling, as if waiting for me to make the first move. I pulled back on the highway, driving toward the distant, faint glow of Goldfield. My hands were tight on the wheel. In the rearview mirror, their headlights remained a constant distance behind me, a silent escort or a warning. About 5 miles from town, I saw them, not in the mirror, but out my driver's side window, to the north. Not 1 or 2 lights. Dozens, spread across the horizon like a low, strange constellation. They moved not randomly, but in coordinated patterns. Sweeping lines, grid formations. This was no malfunction. This was a professional, organized operation. As I watched, 3 of the lights broke from the main group. They turned in unison and began moving toward the highway. Toward me, my foot pressed the accelerator. The Explorer's engine groaned as I pushed it to 70. The lights matched my speed effortlessly. 75. 80. They weren't chasing so much as pacing me, keeping a steady, ominous distance off to my left, flying parallel to road over terrain no vehicle could cross. They were herding me. The town limits of Goldfield appeared, a small green sign illuminated by my headlights. The moment my tires passed that invisible line, the 3 pursuing lights stopped. They hovered at the very edge of the developed area, just beyond the last street lamp, as if held back by an invisible boundary. Then, as one, they turned and streaked back toward the northern darkness. The Suburban behind me turned off onto a side road and vanished. I drove to my apartment, parked, and sat for a long time looking at my dark front door. They wouldn't enter town. That was the rule, it seemed. Out there, in the empty places, I was vulnerable. Here I was safe. For now. The call came 3 days later. An unknown number. A voice I didn't recognize. Undistorted this time. "Tired. Human. There's something you need to see." The old radar installation. Be there at sunset. Come alone. It could have been a trap. It probably was. But it was also the first thread I'd been offered since everything went dark. I arrive an hour before sunset, parking my personal truck a half-mile away and hiking through a dry wash to approach the installation from the blind side of the hill. I watched for an ambush for 45 minutes. Nothing moved but ravens and the wind through sagebrush. The sun was a bleeding orange line on the western mountains when a figure emerged from the bunker's shadowed entrance. A woman, mid-40s. She scanned the area, then looked directly at my hiding spot in the rocks. "You can come out," she called, her voice carrying on the thin air. If they were watching, we'd already be surrounded. I stood and walked down the slope toward her. "You're the deputy investigating the disappearances," she said as I approached. "Who are you?" "Dr. Patricia Lansing. Until 6 months ago, I was a senior researcher with the program running those lights. I know what happened to Warren Dufresne and Gilbert Armbruster, and I know you are in serious, immediate danger. Why are you telling me this?" "Because what they're doing is wrong. Because I watch people get cataloged as acceptable losses and decided I couldn't be part of it anymore." She glanced nervously at the darkening sky. "We don't have much time. The systems become active at full dark." She led me to the lee side of the concrete bunker, out of the wind. "The radar installations aren't just tracking systems," she began, speaking quickly. "They're one component of an integrated network that's been monitoring phenomena in this region for over 70 years. The lights you see are autonomous aerial units. The technology was reverse engineered from objects recovered in the Nevada desert, starting in the late 1940s. You're saying the government has alien technology. Not alien in the sense of little green men from another planet. The recovered materials, their physics is different. They operate outside our conventional understanding of space and time. The program's goal was never about public disclosure. It was about weaponization and control." She pulled a folded topographic map from her jacket. "The lights are not just observers. They're retrievers." She spread the map on a flat rock. It was covered in handwritten symbols in red, blue, and yellow ink. Red locations are confirmed retrieval sites, where the systems acquire targets. Blue are underground processing facilities, most built during Cold War expansions. Yellow are the active radar and communication installations that coordinate everything. She pointed to a cluster of red marks east of Goldfield. "This is where your missing people were taken." "Taken where?" "To a processing facility near the Nevada test site. Once there, they're assessed. Their memories are evaluated. If they're deemed a low contamination risk, if what they saw can be explained away, or if they have minimal social connections, they're sometimes returned, disoriented, with fabricated memories of accidents or exposure. If they're high risk," she trailed off, "they become permanent assets of program, or they're terminated." The clinical horror of her words settled in the cold air between us. "How many people?" I asked, my voice tight. "Hundreds since the program shifted to full automation in the 1980s. Maybe more. The selection is careful. Isolated individuals. People without strong familial ties. Those whose disappearances won't trigger major investigations. Ranchers living alone. Prospectors. Homeless veterans camping in the backcountry. The forgotten." She looked at me, her eyes fierce. "Your 2 missing men broke the pattern. Warren had a family. Gilbert had a daughter who cared. That's why your investigation drew attention. It was louder than they're used to." A faint, high-pitched humming began to build in the north. We both looked up. A single light, like a distant star, was moving toward us. "They monitor this installation," she said, folding the map and shoving it into my hands. "They know I'm here. Go. Now. Drive straight to town and don't stop. Don't use your main roads. Take the old mining tracks to the south. They won't pursue into Goldfield, but out here you're exposed. What about you?" I've been compromised since I left the program. They've been looking for me. Maybe this will draw them off your trail for a while. She was already backing toward the bunker entrance. Go, and don't trust anyone. The program has people in local agencies, in state government. Anyone could be a watcher. Dr. Lansing. Go. I turned and ran down the slope toward where I'd hidden my truck. The humming grew louder, rising in pitch. I didn't look back. I reached the truck, fumbled with the keys, and started the engine. As I bounced down the rocky wash toward the old mining road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The light was descending directly over the bunker, a brilliant white pinprick against the deep purple sky. Then it dipped below the hill line, and the terrain hid the installation from view. The map on the passenger seat was detailed, marked with GPS coordinates, facility designations, and dates. If it was genuine, it was a roadmap to a secret war being waged in the American desert. If it was disinformation, it was an incredibly elaborate trap. I drove the treacherous back routes for an hour, my headlights slicing through the absolute darkness, before I dared to join a paved road a few miles from town. The next day, I called in sick. I spent the hours in the county records room, a place even dustier than the basement storage room had been. I started cross-referencing. I pulled every missing person report filed in Esmeralda and 3 neighboring counties since 1990. I looked for the pattern Dr. Lansing had described. Single individuals, remote areas, nighttime disappearances, vehicles sometimes found abandoned, investigations quickly assumed by federal agencies or going conspicuously cold. I found them. Not 2, not 10, 34 separate cases across 3 decades that fit the profile perfectly. A mechanic who vanished while driving between remote ranches in 1992. A geologist doing field work in 1998. A backpacker in 2004. A solo hunter in 2011. The reports were sparse. The outcomes were always the same, and no resolution. Case archived. 34 people. A pattern hidden in plain sight, buried under the bureaucratic inertia of understaffed rural counties. As I was photographing the last of the files with my phone, a text message came through from an unknown number. Asterisk, Dr. Lansing is dead. They found her at the installation. You're next if you don't stop. Asterisk, I drove back out to the radar installation that night. I didn't bother with stealth. The bunker entrance, which had been a corroded metal door hanging on broken hinges, was now sealed under a smooth, fresh layer of concrete. It looked as if it had never been an entrance at all. The concrete was still slightly darker than the surrounding walls. The work done within the last 24 hours. No body, no evidence, just a tomb poured over the only person who had tried to help me. I stood there in the wind, the map heavy in my jacket pocket. I had hit a wall made of concrete and corpses. A woman was dead for giving me the truth. 2 families had no answers. A system, operating smoothly for decades, was designed to be untouchable. Giving up meant accepting that some lives were expendable for the sake of a secret, that the forgotten would stay forgotten. But continuing meant I would likely join them. My name would become the 35th case file. Another quiet, unresolved disappearance. Sheriff CR would get a visit. He'd be encouraged to close the file. He would, knowing what was good for him and his family. And that would be that. I got back in my truck. I hadn't stopped. But for the first time, I couldn't see a way forward that I didn't stop. I couldn't, but my investigation changed. I stopped filing reports. I stopped asking official questions. I stopped going to the radar sites. Instead, I began a quiet, patient cataloging. I became an archivist of the forgotten. I used my patrol routes as cover. I visited the locations on Dr. Lansing's map that were accessible. I took discreet photographs of terrain, of access roads, of unmarked facilities that appeared on no public record. I noted vehicle traffic, the unmarked Suburbans, the plain white vans that appeared at odd hours on backcountry roads. I began building my own map, not on paper, but in my mind. A latticework of connections between the red, blue, and yellow marks she had shown me and the real geography of the desert. I memorized coordinates. I learned the patterns of the watchers. The lights continued their patrols. I saw them from my apartment window most clear nights. Distant, silent constellations moving with purpose along the northern horizon. Some nights they swept closer, dancing along the very edge of town, testing that invisible boundary as if probing for weakness, a perpetual reminder. Sheriff CR knew I was still looking. He never asked, and I never told him. It was an understanding. He provided what protection he could by looking the other way, by not assigning me paperwork that would create a record of my activities. In return, I kept his name out of it. His plausible deniability was his armor. I reached out carefully to the families of some of the older disappearances from my records room list. I posed as a researcher compiling a history of missing persons in the region. The responses were a symphony of grief and frustration. A sister still searching for her brother who vanished in 1995. A son who remembered his father. A loner who loved desert solitude, never returning from a camping trip in 2003. The stories were heartbreakingly similar. A loved one goes into the remote desert, doesn't come back. A cursory investigation produces nothing. Life moves on while a hole remains forever unfilled. Irene Dufresne still called the office every few weeks. Her voice grew thinner, more brittle each time. "Any news?" she would ask. I would tell her the investigation was ongoing at the federal level, that we were awaiting updates. It was the cruelest lie I've ever had to tell, but the truth, that her husband was taken by a secret government program and would never be seen again, would have destroyed what little she had left. Gilbert Armbruster's daughter hired a second private investigator. He was a former FBI agent from Phoenix. He was thorough, professional, and skeptical of my vague answers. 2 weeks into his investigation, his car was found abandoned on the shoulder of Highway 95, engine cold, driver's door open. He hasn't been seen since. The private investigation firm closed the case and stopped returning the daughter's calls. The message was being reinforced. Move on. Forget. I didn't. I started leaving. Not my job, not the county, but little pieces of evidence. A sealed envelope with copies of my photos and notes with a trusted friend in Reno, with instructions to open it if anything happened to me. A encrypted digital packet uploaded to a secure server with a dead man's switch timer. I wasn't naive enough to think it would bring down the program, but it might prevent my own disappearance from being another quiet, unsolved file. The winter passed. The desert turned cold and sharp. The light still came. One February night, I witnessed something new from my window. Not just the silent patrols, but an event that a cluster of a dozen lights converged on a single point in the desert, maybe 10 miles out. They formed a tight, rotating ring. For several minutes, a deep, subsonic thrum vibrated the glass of my window panes. Then the lights shot upward, straight up, in perfect unison, and vanished into the cloud layer. The thrumming stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. What were they doing? A retrieval? A deployment? A communication? I had no way of knowing. I just added it to the catalog. In the spring, I received a package. No return address. Postmarked from a small town in Utah. Inside was a small, hardened USB drive and a note. The handwriting was different from Dr. Lansing's. The program is called Aurora. The lights are AAVs, autonomous aerial vehicles. They are controlled from a primary facility deep under the Nellis Range. The map you have is incomplete. The attached file contains updated schematics and a list of project directors from 1972 to present. Use it carefully. You are not alone. The drive contained terabytes of data. Technical schematics that made the Desert Shield binder look like a children's book. Personnel lists. Budget allocations hidden within other Department of Defense projects. Flight logs. It was a data dump of staggering proportions. A leak. I didn't plug the drive into any computer connected to my home network or my life. I bought a cheap, off-the-shelf laptop with cash in Las Vegas, a burner phone for data hotspot. In a motel room 50 miles from home, I scrolled through the contents. It was all there. The origins, the crashes, the recovery and reverse engineering projects with names like Aquarius and Sigma, the transition to automated systems in the 1980s, the policy documents discussing civilian interface incidents and post-event sanitization procedures, the cold, bureaucratic language used to describe making people vanish. I also found my name in a security briefing dated shortly after Gilbert Armbruster's disappearance. I was listed as a local law enforcement anomaly. My personnel file was attached. A recommendation field read: monitor, redirect if possible, terminate inquiry if necessary. The finality of that last phrase sat in my stomach like a stone. Terminate inquiry could mean closing the investigation. It could also mean terminating the investigator. I copied the most damning digestible documents, the policy memos, the maps showing facilities, onto a separate drive. I wrapped the original Aurora drive in foil and buried it in a location only I know, out in the desert. The cheap laptop and burner phone I took apart and scattered the pieces in different dumpsters across 3 counties. I had the proof now. Not just a story, not just a map from a doomed whistleblower, but primary source documents. And I had no idea what to do with it. If I went public, I'd be discredited in hours. A rural deputy with a wild story about UFOs and secret bases? The documents would be called fakes. I'd be labeled unstable, fired, and likely arrested on some manufactured charge. Or I'd simply vanish during a hike. If I took it to a journalist, I'd be putting a target on their back as well. Dr. Lansing's fate was warning enough. If I did nothing, it was all for nothing. I've chosen a middle path. For now, I continue to watch. To document, I've expanded my network, making careful, anonymous contact with a handful of other researchers and witnesses I've identified as credible through the leaked data. We don't meet. We communicate through encrypted, ephemeral channels. We share observations. We compare notes. We are building consensus of reality outside official channels. The program, Aurora, continues. The AVs fly. People still disappear, though the pattern has shifted slightly since my investigation. They're even more careful about selecting targets who won't be missed. I still drive my patrol routes. I still answer calls about cattle and tourists stuck in sand. I still live in my small apartment in Goldfield. On the surface, nothing has changed, but everything has. I look at the desert differently now. I don't see empty space. I see a monitored zone. I see a hunting ground. I see a battlefield in a silent war the public doesn't know is being fought. I don't know how this ends for me. Maybe I live a long life, retire, and move away, forever looking over my shoulder. Maybe my name eventually appears on a list, and I become another lesson about the cost of curiosity. Maybe one day there's a reckoning, and the truth comes out, and it matters that someone was keeping a record. But this isn't about an ending anymore. It's about witnessing. It's about refusing to let the forgotten be erased completely. Even if all I am is a footnote, a deputy who saw something he shouldn't have and wouldn't look away, then that's what I'll be. The lights are out there tonight as I finish writing this. I can see their glow from my desk. They're moving north to south in a standard reconnaissance line. They don't know I'm watching them back. They don't know that their secret isn't as safe as they believe. Most people in this county will go to bed tonight and never give a second thought to those distant lights. If they even notice them at all, they'll wake up tomorrow, drink their coffee, go about their lives, blissfully unaware of how close the silence sits to their doors, or how thin the line is between being a citizen and becoming a subject of study. But I know, and because I know I have a responsibility, to remember Warren Dufresne, to remember Gilbert Armbruster, to remember Dr. Patricia Lansing, to remember the 34 others from the files, and the hundreds more whose names I'll never know. The machine was supposed to stay dead, but it didn't, and I found it, and now, you know it's there. Toot it! If this story resonated with you, if it made you look at the night sky a little differently, then I need you to do something for me. It's a simple action, but it's the most powerful tool we have against silence. First, hit the like button on this video. That single click is a signal. It tells the algorithm that stories like this matter, that truth matters. It helps this channel, Winds of Thought, reach others who need to hear it. It's a digital ripple in a pond of noise, and it matters more than you know. Second, subscribe to the channel. By subscribing, you're not just getting more content. You're joining a community of the curious. You're becoming part of a network of people who believe that some questions are worth asking, especially when they're uncomfortable. We explore the stories from the edges of the map, the histories hidden in plain sight, and the mysteries that operate just beyond the corner of your eye. Your subscription ensures these stories continue to be told. Third, and this is the most important part, share what you've heard. Share this video with one person you trust, a friend, a family member. Don't frame it as a wild conspiracy. Frame it as a story about curiosity, about institutional secrecy, about the human cost of secrets. Start a conversation. The greatest weapon against hidden truths is not a lone whistleblower, but an informed public. Awareness is the first and most vital step. I also want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me if you've ever seen something in a remote place that you couldn't explain. Your stories, your observations are data points. They help complete a picture. And be careful. I mean that sincerely. If you live near wide open spaces, if you enjoy hiking or camping in remote areas, stay aware. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. There is no shame in caution. The desert, the mountains, the forests, they are beautiful, but there are also places where you can be very, very alone. This isn't about promoting fear. It's about promoting awareness. The world is a more complex and layered place than we are often taught. There are histories buried beneath the official histories. There are programs that operate in the shadows of our daily lives. My name doesn't matter. My story is just one thread in a vast, tangled web. But if my thread connects with yours and yours with someone else's, eventually we weave something stronger than secrecy. We weave a shared understanding. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time, your curiosity, and your courage. This isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning of a much larger conversation. Take care of yourselves. Watch the skies. And never, ever stop asking questions. This has been a presentation of Winds of Thought.